Now we need to trace a pattern of the fish. We're going to start with the flat pattern, or as the fish laying directly on our freezer paper. This pattern is what we're going to actually cut out and transfer that onto the piece of foam we're going to be carving on. This is where we can actually start to determine what pose we want the bass in. A slight tail up is a good pose. A slight tail down is also a good pose. You could also do it straight. I always like to put some curve out, no matter what pose I do, or some curve in towards the wall. In this case, with this particular customer, he had requested a very slight tail up and slight out. So you can see I just have the tail up a little bit. This is a natural pose for a bass. You would not want to jack it way up like that. That would not look natural, even though sometimes they can do that. You also would not want to jack the tail way down like that. Just subtle poses make for a really nice mount. So slight tail up. Another thing we need to touch on quickly is the anatomy of the head. If we were going to mount this bass with the mouth slightly open or closed, we could trace it just like it looks here. But when the mouth opens on a bass, the entire anatomy of the front half of the bass changes. So if we're going to make a tracing, we have to accurately transfer that change onto it. And the only way to do that is by actually opening up the mouth. So I'm going to grab it by the eyes, and I'm just going to put a piece of foam in. You can see largemouth bass are all head and mouth, and that actually changes the body completely. That's very important, and that's a common mistake that beginners make when they're carving. They trace all their fish with the mouth closed, and then it's inaccurate when they actually mount it and open up that mouth. So to make a tracing or a pattern of the fish, we're going to use a China marker. What's nice about this is this will write on the freezer paper even when it's wet. I would avoid using permanent markers or pens or pencils because they're not going to give you an adequate line to see where you're going. Our first mark we're going to make is directly where the scales stop and the head starts. We're going to make one line there. That's our starter line. The next line we're going to make is where the gullet enters underneath the two gill covers. Basically where that line is right here. And you can actually see this area where we're going to be replicating when we're carving. That's where that line is. So we're going to line him back up where I had him. It's okay even if you go just a little bit bigger than when this mouth has been jacked open. We can adjust for that later. One rule of thumb when you're making a tracing on a largemouth bass or any fish, you do not want to exactly trace right next to the skin. You want to go just a little bigger, and that's going to allow for our saw cutting through the foam and taking some of that foam away, and also when we do our carving with our files. Through any of the steps of carving on a largemouth bass, you never want to completely go to the exact measurement. You always want to go just a little bigger. It's much easier to adjust down a little bit more later on when you're doing the sizing process rather than having a form that's too small. So we're also going to mark a few other anatomy points right now. We're going to mark where the dorsal starts, the spiny dorsal, which is right here. We're going to mark where the soft dorsal starts. We're going to mark where the soft dorsal ends. It's right there. This area of the bass is called the caudal peduncle. And we're going to make a mark right where the caudal or tail fin stops and the scales start, which is right here. Same on this side. Okay, come down here to our pelvic fins. We're going to make one mark there. As you can see, the body does tend to dip in just a little bit where these pelvic fins are. So we made a mark so we know where that's going to be. This is the vent. We're going to make another mark there. This is a prominent point on largemouth bass because this is going to establish the gut or the belly look on the bass. Everyone wants a big gut or belly look on a largemouth bass. So we want to accent that even a little bit more than it is right here. That's a key feature people look at. This is the anal fin, and this is where those couple of spiny dorsals are. I'm going to make a little mark right where that starts. and I'm going to make a mark where the anal fin ends. So basically, I have laid out all the main anatomical points on the largemouth bass before I made any other lines for our pattern. These are key marks that are going to show us where we need to be as we're working on the fish. I'm going to show you exactly where I made these actual lines. This is the caudal line. This is the both of the anal fin lines we talked about, the vent line, the pelvic fin line, and then the throat latch line. And if we turn it around this way, you can get a better view of exactly where I made those initial lines. This is where the head stops and the scales start. This marks the spiny dorsal start and stop, also the start of the soft dorsal and the end of the soft dorsal. If you can see this, there's no gap between these fins on the top of a bass. I just made that as a little mark, and you'll know why as we actually get carving on the fish, why I made those marks, because those are anatomical points that we'll be accenting when we carve. So I'm going to turn it back around. I'm going to start the initial pattern drawing on the fish. So I'm going to make sure all my lines are in the exact same position. We're going to start at the top of the head. And we're just going to connect those lines. Again, I'm not directly going right against the skin of the fish. I'm leaving a little bit of an area, making it a little bit larger everywhere I go. It's always easier to bring it down a little bit more. When this thing is actually complete, if it's a little bit bigger than what the customer brought in, he's never going to complain. So you don't have to worry about that. Okay, now we're going to make those same lines on the belly area. And we're just connecting our lines and following the pattern of the fish. You can see how I made this little notch here where the belly of the bass is, actually the stomach of the bass in the spawning area. That's what we're going to be accenting with the carving. And we're just going to connect this line, the caudal pedunculate region. So we've made our initial pattern tracing on the bass. Now what we're simply going to do is move the bass up on our freezer paper and see what we came out with. You can see we have the initial pattern made, but we need to connect some areas. And the reason I do it this way is these areas are going to be slightly raised. If you look at the bass, when these fins are flared out, you'll see that this area is not flat. It is slightly protruding down. And not only is it protruding down, it cones in and together. It's not a sharp V, it's a very gradual V. It comes to a V right at the fin root. That is also the same way with the dorsal. So we're going to just connect this line here. I'm just going to give a little bit more raise. Anything you do on this tracing is going to directly transfer onto your foam. Any little notch or mark you make. So keep that in mind. It tends to stay that way right to the finished product. Okay, now I'm going to just connect this one. I'm going to accent a little bit more than it even is on the fish. Just going to make it easier for us with our tracing. Going to connect the tail. Again, this is the very end of the caudal peduncle, right where it enters into the actual caudal or tail fin. Now this is an area up here that we have to pay special attention to. And this is the curved area. You see, if you look in taxidermy catalogs, you'll see that this area has this kind of a shape. We have to be very careful with this and make sure it's done correctly. If this area here, let's say if we made a line like this, you wouldn't have any area for your gills and esophagus to go into when you open up that mouth when you're mounting it. It would bunch up against it. So this has to be opened up. Keep that in mind throughout the entire process. This was that area where it's slightly in here on the pelvic fins. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to even it out a little bit because we can always carve it in when we're doing our actual foam removal with our files. Now we need to make a pattern of the fish showing the curve we're going to be putting out. This is the flat pattern. We need to make the other pattern. So it's this profile. Right now the fish is straight, as you can see. We want to have a slight curve out to the whole fish. So we're just going to slightly curve the fish out. And in this particular case, I'm not going to exactly trace right along the skin. I want it to be bigger everywhere. And you'll see why when we're carving. But again, I'm going to make that mark right here, right where the scales stop and the head starts. Same on this side. I'm going to come down here, again at the caudal peduncle region, right where the tail starts to meet the scales. Make another mark. I'm going to make it wider than it actually is. This is very important. We can adjust this later. You do not want to get too thin down here to start. This is just a profile. We're going to bring this up to the belly and make a mark. Come right up again to the head. Same on this side. Sweep around, bigger is better to start, to where the belly is. Sweep around bigger, right to the top. And see what we did. Now this is our top view profile. We're looking down. That's what you're going to see on the bass. Again, now when we did this, we flattened the belly out and we widened it automatically. When the bass is actually swimming in the water, it wouldn't be that flat. Just like if it's laying on the bench dead here, it's not going to be that flat this way. It has more of a curve to it. So we're going to accent that and accommodate that when we're actually doing our carving. We'll be going into depth on that shortly. We need to finish off our actual tracing here by connecting these lines. And I'm just going to connect this so it's just one fell swoop. We can adjust this easily later. You always want to go a little bit bigger when you're starting this. There's no need to go directly with the actual fish when you're doing the tracing. It's just too easy to make a mistake. It's very easy to take off foam while we're doing the carving. And we'll just bring this together. Now obviously this is a little bit wider than you're looking at here, but that's okay. We're going to be adjusting for that. This is just the top profile so we get a nice gentle sweep. Now we need to start taking some measurements of our bass. The more measurements you take, the better. When I carve bass, I normally just take the girth measurement, but when you're starting out, you can't take enough measurements. It doesn't hurt to take these measurements, even if you've been doing it a long time. We're going to be using a number of tools for that. We're going to be using this caliper. We're going to be using this calipers. And we're going to be using this cloth type tape measure. The first measurement we're going to take is going to be regarding this template, and it's going to be the girth. It's important that you always take the girth measurement in the same place. It should be at the widest point on the bass, which is going to be normally right before or maybe a little ways into the spiny dorsal. Sometimes it's right by the pelvic fins. So about right here, you can see where I'm at. We're going to come up. If we pull it tight, we get 13 1/4. We don't want to pull it tight. We want to leave a little bit of extra. So we're actually going to come to 13 3/4. You can see I got a little bit of extra room here. When we actually carve it, we're actually going to be coming in at almost 14 3/4. And we do that because there's going to be skin stretch. We'll go into that later. But for our initial tracing, we want to pretty much have an exacting girth, which is 13 3/4. So we're going to go ahead and write that on our template. I'm just going to make a line here, signifying exactly where that is. You can make this line dotted too to signify that the tape measure went around it if you feel you need to. The next measurement we're going to take is from the cleithrium bone, which is right here, all the way to the caudal peduncle, right where the caudal fin or tail fin meets the scaled area. You'll see that there's a post cleithrium and then the actual cleithrium bone. We want to go directly here, right on the edge of the cleithrium bone. You can go right on the edge or even in the center of it. Either one is fine. And we're going to come right down to that region, the caudal peduncle area, and that's 11.5. And you want that to be an exact measurement. I call that the C to T, cleithrium to tail measurement. Okay, now we're going to take our calipers and we're going to do a few other measurements. We're going to do the height of the fish. You can do it with the tape measure, but in this case we're just going to use our calipers. We're going to take it right at that girth point. Now we'll just take a measurement with our tape measure from our calipers, and that is 5.5, and we'll mark that on our tracing. Another measurement we're going to take with the mouth jacked open is from the very top of the head to the throat latch. That is 4 inches. We're just going to note that on here with a couple of arrows. Now we're going to take a width measurement on the fish. So we're going to set them up. We're going to go right in the center of the fish. Everywhere. The center this way and the center front to back. This just gives us a rough idea where we need to be at. That measurement is 2 3/4. So the fish is basically 2 3/4 wide. If you want to, you can also take that same measurement directly behind the head. Basically where we're taking that is right where the cleithrium bone is. That's 3 inches. Always a little bit wider up there. And take one more measurement. And that is going to be at the caudal peduncle. We're going to take the width down here. Again, I'm using this kind of a calipers. And we're very close. I'm just going to widen her out a little bit. Self some extra room. The reason we do it with this caliper is we can continuously check as we're carving to see exactly where we're at without having to use the other calipers, which is more adjustable. We'll go ahead and make a note of that measurement, even though we're going to be using this throughout the process. That's 1.5 inches. So we've got all of our measurements. We have both of our templates taken. At this point, we are ready to clean off this freezer paper, put the bass aside, and cut these templates out. One note I'm going to talk about is the importance of carving your body while the fish is still in the carcass or not skinned. That way you can see all of the anatomy as you're carving. You can go back and take other measurements. If you would skin it out and just have the meat there, those measurements would still be okay, but you're not going to see all these important anatomical features. So we're going to carve it with the bass laying right on the bench. When we have our body carved, then we're going to go ahead and skin it. One quick thing we are going to do now though is we're going to mark which way this bass is facing so we don't forget and skin down the wrong side. We do that by simply snipping off the pectoral fin. Since our bass is facing right, we would take it off on the left side. Now we're going to cut our patterns out of the freezer paper. We need to do this because we have to transfer this exact shape onto our piece of foam. And the only way to do it is to actually cut them out. So we're going to just follow our lines right along. You can see those other marker lines. I've actually put those right into the actual tracing so we don't lose those as we cut it out. We're going to cut out this inner area. And we're going to come along the top. Okay, now we're going to cut out our top profile. Yeah, we're just following our lines right along. Okay, now at this time we can actually discard the rest of this freezer paper. We no longer need that. Now we're going to transfer our measurements onto our board. Having a board like this in your shop is a great way to lay out your projects. It puts it in a different perspective and keeps you very organized. Because this fish is facing the right, as you can see on our template, I'm going to get rid of this diagram and this top profile just to keep our heads clear. Okay. Now we're going to transfer our measurements from our template onto our board. So as we're carving, we can quickly see exactly what we're working on. We're going to start with our girth, and on our diagram layout board, that's this dotted line. We're going to put our girth right here, which is 13 3/4. We're going to take our measurement from the throat latch to the top of the head, and that is 4 inches. We're going to take our cleithrium to the end of the caudal peduncle region measurement, which is 11 1/2. We're going to take our caudal peduncle height measurement, which is 3. And then we're also going to put our total height of the fish measurement. I don't have that wrote on here. I'm going to do that now. Again, these are these pelvic fins right here. That's where they would be represented. And this is right where the spiny dorsal is stopping. And that is actually 5 1/2. Right there. Okay, now we're going to go to our top profile, which is this one right here. We're going to start by putting this measurement on. This was right in the center of the fish, the dead center from each direction, and that's 2 3/4. This is the width, not the height. Remember how we had our calipers on the fish like this. This is the width of the head measurement, which is 3. And then the caudal peduncle width, which is 1 1/2 inches. So I'm going to actually grab the largemouth bass now and just hold this up by the board so you can see exactly what we're talking about and where all those measurements correspond to. This is the top profile. And this, it would be a cutoff. If we would cut the bass's head off right like this, this is the kind of shape we're looking for. Every fish is shaped a little different. If this would be a crappie, you would actually almost turn this upside down, as crappies are actually lobed on top and they come to a V near the gut. But on a largemouth bass, they're slightly rounded at the top, right here, and then they widen out and slightly flatten out right at the belly or the gut. You can see here that I have a couple of lines drawn, and we're actually going to transfer some measurements from our templates onto there. This measurement here is the same measurement as right here, 5 1/2. So I'm going to put that here just to kind of give you a perspective on what we're doing. This is the width of the fish, or this measurement right here. We're going to put that here. Now that we have a basic blueprint laid out, we can start carving.